Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. This is going to be an interesting video. I have questions that were asked on the video where I posted, hey, I'm looking for viewers' comments to respond to and to basically answer Q&A, sort of with the, your comments. I said I was going to make a video about it, and this is that video. This is the video where I answer your questions and finally, sort of give you some insight into what I'm doing with my collection. One question that I get asked a lot, and it wasn't one that was asked on that video, is how I store my comics. And I kind of wanted to explain that because it's one of those things that people like, oh, you have all your comics always exposed. And it's something where people get a little bit nervous, especially because some of these comics are pretty expensive. Will they fade? Will they go, will they have issues, right? And I wanted to explain the room. I'm going to it might be a little jiggly, so bear with me. I'm going to lift you up here. I'm going to walk you around. So if you see, there's the doorway to this room. So this room is actually isolated, okay? And if you look up at the top, you can see the lights for this room. So what it is this room is in my basement. And my it's sort of in like this weird kind of alcove. It's like in a little area. And then it's in its own separate room. So it's kind of very disconnected from any light source. There's no windows in this room. And the door, makes it so that it's completely isolated. And it's temperature controlled. So that's pretty important. You got to control the lighting. And you got to control that temperature. And the other thing is with the lighting, I use LED lights so that they don't fade the comics. It's the UV light that's really, really bad for comics. So by avoiding all of those things, I basically protect my comics from lighting and temperature changes. The other big thing that I do, and it's a little weird to show you this, is I'll explain. I was thinking of lifting it up, but it'd be just too weird. Is the floor. The floor itself is another thing that I do to protect my comics. So the floor is a cork floor, and which absorbs any moisture. And it also all the comics are like off the ground, and I actually have channels underneath the shelving units that I have for my comics, where if there was ever a flood, for example, which would be terrible for my comics, if there was ever a flood, there's actually a channel that protects them from getting wet. So they're off the floor, and there's that channel that protects them from getting wet. So that's how I store my comics. I kind of have all these kind of little safety things to protect my comics. Also, the door is a quite thick door. It's actually designed to be a fire break. So if there's ever a fire in the house, this room would probably be one of the safest rooms in the house to protect against the fire. So that's some of the stuff that I do to protect my comics. I really do try my best to protect my comics. So it's a question I get asked a lot, and I just figured I might as well give a good answer to that question. How do I protect my comics? So the next question is from Chi Tien, and he asked, how long have you taken to amass your collection? Well, there's a whole bunch of stages that happen with my collection. A lot of my Disney and like comics like related to Gold Key and Dell, I actually collected when I was very young. Because my parents would just give me those comics when I was growing up. So I had a pretty big collection of those comics. Then in the early 80s, I went to a coin store because I collect coins. And I saw this one comic on the wall that I thought was just so brilliant. It was Howard the Duck #1. And I didn't really consider myself a comic collector until I saw that comic. Because it was like up on the wall. it was like $10. I was like, wow, somebody's paying $10 for a comic. The comics back then were like 25 cents. So $10 was a pretty big price for a comic, or they were maybe $1 actually. But typically you could get them pretty cheap, is my point. And to see a comic for that much, and I saved my money to buy it. I saved I saved my allowances, and I would do like little errands around the house to earn enough money to buy this comic that was on the wall. And my parents were like a little bit against it because they didn't really like the more hero related comics. They really kind of were kind of saying, oh, don't waste your money on that. It's just a comic. It's not really going to have any value. So they were really kind of against the idea. And because they saw comics as just something you read and trash. Really, that's how they saw comics. They didn't see it as something worthy of collecting like coins. They really supported my coin collecting, not so much with the comics. So when I saw that comic, it really got me into collecting comics. So I basically got that comic, and then I started getting one or two, maybe a comic here and there, all the way through the 80s. Like every so often I get like some kind of cool comic. Like nothing really that held up and became super valuable. Like it was a good time to have bought, but I didn't necessarily get anything at that time. It was actually in the 90s when I went to university and was then able to do whatever I wanted with my own money. To basically, I went crazy with buying comics. And what I ended up getting into was a lot of these bad girl art, like art. So Lady Death, Lady Rawhide, Vampirella. And I really got heavy into collecting those kind of comics during the early 90s. And the other thing that I got into was Malibu comics. And I collected the complete collection of Malibu comics. And then I also collected a lot of magazine horror. So when I say that, I mean Warren Publishing. So that's Famous Monsters, Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella. And I collected ended up getting the whole collection. And if you see, I'm going to pick you up again, so bear with me. Let's see. These shelves over here, I'm not sure if you can see that, but those shelves over there, they're basically filled with magazines. And the magazines are like, I have maybe, I would say about 20. I don't know. Maybe something like that. I would say about 20. Yeah, 20. 20 short boxes, magazine style boxes of these Warren collecting ones. And then I have another like 10 or so others in another shelf of the same thing, where it's like more of these Warren related magazines. And I have probably the only collection in existence that is complete of the Warren Publishing. I have every single American issue. I have a lot of the Canadian issues, and I have all the Spanish, complete collection of the Spanish issues. I have all the Japanese issues. I have like the Swedish, the Brazilian. I have all the Brazilian ones. I have a very complete collection. I have all the Mexican ones. It's a very, very good collection of Warren Publishing. And so that was my big, like, one of my bigger collections is just that publisher. And I really love them. A lot of the art that we consider sort of these maybe 70s and 80s classic artists, and some of them are even golden age, were used, these famous artists were used in Warren Publishing. So I'll give you examples of some of the names. Frank Frazetta, who is a golden age artist. He was the one that did Vampirella #1. And he also did many of the Creepies and Eerie covers. So very prestigious artists were involved with this magazine. And what you have to understand is Warren magazines, they started in the late 50s and they ran all the way up to 1983. And what happened was when the Comic Code Authority kind of hit, a lot of these talented artists were kind of out of work because the whole the market went from being fairly large to being very small overnight with the comic market. So a lot of the Warren was able to pick up a lot of really talented artists fairly affordably, and that's kind of a major thing. So like you get other artists that appeared in Warren were like Richard Corbin, and San Julian, a lot of these Spanish artists. I think they were trying to find affordable artists that were just awesome. uh, there's just like so many. I can't even think for some reason. There's just so many really talented artists that were in this publisher. And so I really loved those ones, and I really like Vampirella as a character. So I ended up collecting a lot of that stuff. So that was my 90s amassing of collection. And then I sort of started collecting other stuff along the way. Like, I still liked superhero stuff, so I'd still pick up a few issues here and stuff, but here and there. But what happened was I collected during the 90s, and the 90s was like the worst time to be collecting because they massively overproduced the comics. And they just really built this, big bubble in terms of the comic industry, a bubble that people are still scared of now. Like I still have those fears. Like, oh, is the comic market going to burst? And it's a little different market. Like nowadays, they're producing maybe 50 to 100,000 comics, for a printing of one particular comic. Back then, they were producing like 1 million to 5 million, like just way overproducing. And people would literally buy like 20 copies of X-Men #1 or some kind of #1 comic. And it always seemed like there was some new gimmick that they would have, like, foil covers or hologram covers, something that would, oh, you got to get this book. And it was just like a bit of, it was a very bubble creating market that was existing in the 90s. And I fell victim to that. I did buy a lot of these kind of comics that are really just worthless now. So, it happens. And I learned from that though, because I bought into a lot of the hype, and I bought comics that I didn't necessarily like that much. I mean, some of them I did. I actually do love the foil covers, and I do love the hologram covers. I think there's sort of a coolness to that. But I learned from my lesson about being, getting burned from buying those. And so that was my next sort of phase. And then I sort of slowly buying a few things. Like I still picked up anytime there was a movie, I'd pick up a few comics from that movie. Like when Into the Spider-Verse happened, I basically picked up, the first Miles Morales, first Gwen Stacy, first Peter Porker, first all the characters from the movie. And I did the same with Avengers and all this kind of stuff. Like whenever a movie would come out, I tried to pick up all the key issues from it. So I was kind of buying the wrong way because, it's like I'm buying after the movies come out. So it's kind of, I'm paying sort of premium prices. But actually it turned out okay because, for example, Miles Morales, I paid $50 and mine's a 9.4 or 9.2 actually. I'm looking at it right now. And, it's gone up a lot since then. So, some of I didn't do that bad. But I was picking them up when the movies came out. Not the best time to buy. You should always buy way, way earlier. So, unless the movie's bad, then it's a good time to buy. So that was kind of what was happening during the 2000s, that I was sort of buying that way. And I was just buying a few comics here and there, like maybe one or two a month or a few a month. And I was still buying my Warren stuff, and I would buy that a lot more. Fast forward to 2019, which is not that long ago. I sold my house. I had a very expensive house, and it was just killing me. Well, it wasn't, I could survive it, but it just meant that I had no extra money. I was paying double up mortgage payments because I don't like having a mortgage. And I was just having my finances were very tight. So I could only maybe afford to buy 1 or 2 comics a month, like key comics, I should say. And what happened was I sold that house. Somebody randomly bought my house is the weirdest thing. They basically, I had it up on the market and I sort of gave up. I was like, okay, if nobody really wants to buy it, because my wife wanted to move, if nobody wants to buy it, that's fine. I actually loved that house. It was a massive house. It was like 12,000 square feet. It's like this massive house. And, I just, I was like, I'm gonna, I don't mind staying in it. And what happened was somebody was like, hey, I want to buy your house. And they offered a really, really good price. Such a good price that I was able to buy this house, which is still a nice house. It's like a 6,000 square foot home. And for free. I basically, well, not for free, but I had enough money where I didn't have to have a mortgage. And that was huge. Not having that mortgage meant that I could use the money that I was putting into the mortgage to buy comics. So, I kind of went a little crazy with buying comics, especially with the whole lockdown, COVID kind of stuff. I really had nothing else to do with my money, and buying comics seemed like a fun thing to do. So I went a little crazy. And that was another big, massive growth in my comic thing, where I literally get packages every day. And that's why I have so many of these unboxing videos, because I get so many packages. So I've been buying up a lot of comics, and they've really exploded. So what I do is, last year in 2020 and 2019, I really focused on getting all the keys that I always wanted, like Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man 1, X-Men 1, Fantastic Four number 1, Fantastic Four number 5, all the keys that I always wanted, my Wonder Woman 1, All-Stars 8, all those major keys I really focused last year on. That was my where I was spending all my money. And I basically tried to get all the keys that I ever wanted last year. That was my thing. This year, I've been kind of switching my focus a bit more, where I'm focusing on things that other people aren't really specking on yet. So that's why I'm getting into the Captain Marvels, the Golden Age stuff, the specific artists like Schomburg or Matt Baker or L.B. Cole. And I'm getting these things that right now are kind of becoming hot, but really are undervalued and underrated as well. These are comics that I actually believe have a lot more potential than some of these Miles Moraleses or, modern comics that really I don't think are at the same caliber. So, I've been picking up those. Then this is where I'm sort of right now. And I've been sort of amassing a pretty big collection as a result. And another thing that I sort of got into was a lot of good girl art. You'll notice that a lot of my unboxings are either Archie, which has a lot of good girl art, and kind of humor art, and like things like the jungle comics. So that's where I've been kind of going with this collection. And so really, when you ask the question, how long did it take me to amass my collection? Well, it's really, as I said, it's a pretty big explanation, because it goes so many generations almost of my shopping experience. It was like my childhood, where I'd get all these comics. I'd get a huge comic collection, but it was all stuff that was read and abused. And then it was like where I finally actually kind of dawned on the idea that collecting comics was a cool thing, when I saw that first Howard the Duck. And then in the 90s, when I went in, I got sucked into the boom of the 90s and collecting then. And then again, this sort of re-boom of collecting comics in 2019. So all of those kind of transitions in my life led to different booms in my collection in terms of how many comics that I collected. And probably a follow-up question that nobody did ask, but I'll answer anyways, is how many comics are in my collection? And I think there's probably, between my Warren collection and all these other things that I have, I would say about 10 to 20,000. I know that's really vague, but just looking at the number of long boxes that I have at least 40, 40 boxes. You can do the math of that. That's about 40 times 300. And then I have other boxes. So, and then I have all my slabs. I have about 400 slabs now, 400 or 500 slabs. It's a pretty big collection. So I'd say, just to ballpark it, like I'd say anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 comics in my collection. So it's a pretty big collection. And I really did focus on getting keys. So there's not much, there's some crap in my collection. Actually, there's a lot of crap in my collection, but there's a lot of really high valued comics in my collection. So I hope that, answers the question. The next one is from QE, I should say. And if you were to choose one comic of all the ages, which would it be? So, if I could pick one comic from each, like the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Copper Age, and Modern. Okay, so if I was just going to pick one from each, what would I pick? Well, Golden Age, I would pick Wonder Woman #1. To me, even though that's not her first appearance, something about Wonder Woman #1, which is right there, that comic to me is like my ultimate grail. It's one that I always wanted to have. It's one that I was like, wow, I had this in my collection. I was like going crazy, goo over it. I just loved it. So that for me is the Golden Age, like that comic. It's that superhero. It's got that iconic scene where she's kind of riding the horse through the no man's land in World War II, or actually it's supposed to be World War One. I should say World War One. It's that no man's land where the war had sort of gotten to where trench warfare. It's just an iconic comic in so many ways. So that'd be my Golden Age pick. My Silver Age pick, I'm just trying to think, would probably be X-Men #1. And I say probably because it'd be a real toss-up between X-Men #1 and Fantastic Four #1. And I'm sort of on the fence about which one I would choose. But the reason being, I actually like Fantastic Four more than X-Men. So, it's one of those things. And probably I'll get a lot of flack for saying that, but I'm a big Fantastic Four fan. So, yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know. And my next age would be Bronze Age. Bronze Age would probably be my House of Secrets right there. I love that cover. I love the story in that one. It is, even though Hulk 181 was a bigger deal to me to get, I just love that comic so much. That House of Secrets one, I just think it's just so brilliant on so many levels. I love the story. I love the cover. It's one of my favorite covers of all comics. It's just a really great cover. And I always like something where it's a little bit controversial. The reason I consider this a little bit controversial is the monster, it looks like it's going to kill the girl. And, it's that whole judging people based on their appearance. We think, it's a monster, it's going to be the evil one. And really, it's the handsome husband that's the one that you got to be careful of. So I just love that whole twist that they have within that. And it's all captured within that cover. It's just, I love that whole story within that cover. Really brilliant comic. It's my favorite from that era of the Bronze Age. Moving up into the Copper Age, I would say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1. It's a comic I don't even own, but I'd love to have it. If anyone wants to send me a first printing of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, I will gladly accept it, and you'll be my new best friend. It is, like, to me, very symbolic of the that Copper Age Grail. It just is what it is. It's a comic that I think really represents the pinnacle of the Copper Age. It's the rise of these independent comics, and independent comics that not only are independent but are mainstreamed. That the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles really changed the game, because they were the first sort of really small press to hit that historic heights of becoming not just mainstream but popular mainstream. Like, there was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles everywhere. So I really do think that that would be my choice for Copper Age grails and major comics. Now, getting into the modern age, which is really anything beyond the 90s till now, there would be, I'm just trying to think what one I would choose. I would probably choose something like, I would probably choose Spawn #1. And again, it's for what it symbolized more than anything else. And the reason I picked Spawn #1 is it was really the flagship for Image Comics. Now, Image Comics is a well-established, publisher of comics. It is the #3 publisher for comics. And I would choose that one for that reason, that it really did have a huge impact on comics. You'll notice whenever I choose things, I have a tendency of choosing comics that have that historical significance. For me, history and comics kind of go together, and I love that whole history behind comics. So that would be my modern choice. Spawn #1. Probably not the most valuable one I could have chosen. I could have chosen so many others, but that would be the one I'd choose. Okay, now the next question is, what is your favorite hero and favorite villain? So my favorite hero would be either Vampirella or Wonder Woman. I'd probably go with Wonder Woman. When you ask me today, if you ask me tomorrow, maybe I'd go with Vampirella. I do love both, but I see Vampirella as she's a hero, but kind of a little bit of an anti-hero. She has a little bit of that element, if you know the whole history of Vampirella. So I'd go with Wonder Woman as a true hero. She's just, Wonder Woman is just one of those characters that she was doing so many cool things that I just really love her as a character. And I always like sexy women. So sexy women, if you basically ask me, to choose, I would choose a sexy woman first. It's just a thing that I do. So I'm going to pick Wonder Woman, and she got a lasso. So it's like bondage, and she's walking around with her own bondage. It's pretty awesome. So yeah, I like Wonder Woman. My favorite villain is the Joker. So I'm a big DC, you'll notice, like, I didn't pick any Marvel in that. I love the Joker. I think he's got that diabolical side. He's not the typical, punching bag kind of villain where you just, some character that the superhero can just pick on and, like just beat up, and, then they make the next comic where they do the same. The Joker really has some depth to him, and they can actually make comics about him because he has so much depth to him. And he's one of those comic characters that has really changed over the years. So he's really grown from being sort of a campy one in the Silver Age to being much more sinister and dark in the Bronze and Copper and Modern Ages. So I really see the Joker as being one of those iconic villains, and I don't really feel like I mean, I'd say Marvel has their, a few that would be almost to that level, like Doctor Doom. I really do feel he kind of is one of those characters that's grown to being like that. Magneto would be another that might be, but I really do think DC did a better job with the Joker. I just think he's just at a different level to the Marvel comparatives. Okay, so that's that question. I kind of ramble on, so I hope you enjoy these answers to your questions, because I want to give you a nice full answer. Somebody asked, and this is Ronald Borges. He asked, what do you think of Daredevil being in She-Hulk in full costume? I would love to see that. I heard that Daredevil, or Matt Murdock, will be in the She-Hulk series, because She-Hulk, her like regular persona is she's a lawyer, and obviously Daredevil has that same element to him. So I could see them doing like some law thing together. And both of them being superheroes, both of them being in, going to that superhero mode, I could see happening as well. So I do think that could be a possibility, a very high chance of that becoming a possibility. I'd love to see it. I love Daredevil. I think he's a great character. So I'd love to see that. So very short answer for that one. High possibility for that happening. And the last question, just a very short question, is do you have Little Dot #1, the first Richie Rich debut? So Little Dot is a comic from the 50s, 50s, that just happened to have the first appearance in a backup story of Richie Rich. And I'm a big Richie Rich fan because, again, when I grew up, the comics that my parents would get me would be Disney comics, or these ones like Richie Rich, Uncle Scrooge, all these kind of ones. So I grew up reading Richie Rich and just loving Richie Rich. The whole idea of a kid having access to all this money, and basically doing whatever he wants. It's sort of a kid's dream, a kid's fantasy of having that capability. So I loved Richie Rich. When I got back into collecting comics, I actually tried to pick up Little Dot #1. That's the first appearance. And every time I get outbid at the last second. And it's been one that has eluded me. I just haven't had any chance of getting that comic. So it is definitely one that's on my want list. It's been on my want list since I created my want list. I actually created my want list when I got back into comics in 2019. And it's been there day one. It's been one that I've always wanted, and I just haven't gotten. So if anyone knows where I can get a Little Dot #1, I'd definitely be very interested in it, and I'd give you a fair price. And yeah, so that's my viewers mail answered. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want me to do your questions, and I'll give you a shout out when I do, comment below with your question, and next week I will do another one of these videos where I answer your questions. And you can ask me anything about comics, and I'll try to do my best to answer. You'll see I do a fairly long video answering the questions and trying to give a really full answer to the questions. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was educational. And thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And check me out on Instagram. I actually post out some unique things on Instagram. I will link my Instagram channel in the description, so you can check that out. It is definitely something you want to check out, because I will give a lot more like the information about the comics and show you some of the cool things that maybe I don't show here on this channel. So definitely check that out. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.